During Korra's battle with Unalaq, the Dark Avatar, the spirit of Raava was badly damaged, and one by one, all of the past Avatar's spirits were destroyed, and the link between Korra and every past Avatar was eventually severed forever. And this sadly includes Avatar Aang. Now, although Aang was the first Avatar to be destroyed in this sequence, it is believed that only his corporeal spirit was destroyed in that first moment, and his incorporeal spirit lasted right until Avatar 1 was destroyed. So in those moments, as Aang knew what was coming, what were his thoughts, and was he terrified in that moment? Well, hit that subscribe button and we're going to break it all down. So here we have an anonymously posted story from the darkest corners of one of the oldest and most used Avatar forums in history. Here, the creators of the original series posted their thoughts, discussed things with fans, and even answered fan theories. On one strange day after the episode where the Avatar connection was destroyed, a nameless post was created going deep into detail on what Aang's final thoughts were in the last moments before he knew he was about to face oblivion. Some to this day still believe this was actually a secret post from the original creators telling us the truth of what happened but was too dark to be put on screen. So let's read it. When the Avatar cycle began to collapse inside of Raava, Aang understood almost immediately that something was terribly wrong. He had spent his entire life believing that the Avatar was part of an unbroken chain, a line stretching backward through thousands of years and forward into a future that he would be lucky enough to see through his future lives. Even when his physical form died, that belief gave him comfort. His own life would end, but the Avatar would continue. Korra would live, and after Korra, there would be another Avatar, and then another, and then another. That continuity was one of the few things that Aang trusted absolutely. So as the past lives began disappearing one by one, he was not just watching individual people vanish. He was watching the thing that he had trusted more deeply than almost anything else in the world begin to fall apart. At first, Aang had no idea exactly what was happening. One Avatar disappeared one by one with no warning and no explanation. The first of these was his own body, but his spirit still remained. So what was going on? These were people who had existed inside of the Avatar spirit for thousands of years. Some were strangers to him, distant lives whose names had never been known, but their presence still mattered. The Avatar was never truly alone because there was always someone behind them. Every failure and every impossible decision that an Avatar could make was carried out with the knowledge that countless others had stood in that very same place before. But now, for the first time, that presence was being erased. As the chain shortened, the losses became more personal. Kyoshi disappeared, then Kuruk, then Yang Chen, and for Aang, Yang Chen's disappearance meant something different. She was not just another past Avatar to him, she was one of the great air nomad avatars, proof that his people had existed before him and that their history reached far beyond the destruction of the temples. Aang had already lived through the loss of the air nomads once. He had returned from the iceberg expecting to find his home, his teachers, and his people waiting for him, only to discover ruins and silence. That loss had defined his entire life, but even after the genocide, something of the air nomads had survived inside of the Avatar cycle. All of the Air Avatar memories, their teachings, and their lives really still existed somewhere within Raava, ready to be recalled when it was needed. As Yang Chen disappeared, Aang felt as though he was losing his people for a second time. The first destruction had taken their bodies, but this one was taking their memory. That was almost impossible for Aang to process in the very short moments that he had. He spent his whole life trying to rebuild what had been lost. He restored temples and trained air acolytes and taught his children what he could remember. He tried to carry an entire civilization forward through stories, rituals, campfire tales, but few people were willing to listen. But he knew that even if he failed in that effort, there would still be some trace of what the air nomads were, stored and kept in the Avatar cycle forever. So even if he failed to continue the Air Nation, it could be continued again later on. It would never be the same as what he remembered it, but it would be based on something that was real and something that was true air nomad culture, just very far in the past. And then Aang's thoughts turned to that air nation that he was trying to build. He knew how fragile all of it was. The air nation had survived only through him, but then through Tenzin, but it was still hanging by a thread. There were only a handful of airbenders left in the world. Tenzin, Jinora, Iki, Milo, and then Rohan later on. Almost the entire biological future of the air nation was right there, in one place. One very dangerous place. Aang had no way of knowing what would happen to them them, and that uncertainty became the darkest part of his final moments. Remember, Aang had no idea that new airbenders were about to appear across the entire Earth Kingdom later in Season 4. He didn't know that the Air Nation would be reborn in a form larger than anything he could have imagined. He didn't know that Tenzin would one day stand before a new generation of air nomads, or that even Jinora, his granddaughter, would become an air master. So because of that, his thoughts were locked on what would happen if Tenzin failed. What would happen if his children chose different lives? They didn't want to be air nomads. What would happen if another war came, or a sickness, or some simple accident? Aang had already learned that an entire people could disappear faster than anyone believed possible. He knew that history did not guarantee survival, and now, as he felt himself disappearing, he believed that the Air Nation was still only one disaster away from extinction. That carried extreme guilt for Aang because he had already once blamed himself for abandoning his people. As a child, he ran away because he was frightened by the responsibility of being the Avatar. He became trapped in the iceberg, and when he woke up, his people were gone. Rationally, Aang knew that the wipeout of the air nomad people was not his fault because he had been a child, but part of him always still blamed himself just that little bit. And now, in his final moments, that same fear returned to him. He was leaving them again, and this time he couldn't even tell Tenzin goodbye. And then, Roku disappeared. For Aang, this loss was deeply personal. Roku had been the first past Avatar who truly guided him, and when Aang was a child, Roku seemed ancient and almost infallible. He appeared when Aang needed answers, explained the history of Sozin, and warned him about the war. But as Aang grew older, their relationship became more complicated. Aang came to understand that Roku had made some mistakes, that he had failed in some ways, and that being a past Avatar did not make someone perfect. He disagreed with Roku, even rejected his advice at times, and even cut him off completely in the Promise comics, never to be seen again. And because of this, Aang actually never spoke with Roku again since the formation of Republic City just a few years after the main series. So for all of this time, Aang never got to apologize to Roku or never got to say anything to him. And then Roku disappeared. And then, without a final conversation, Roku was gone. Aang wanted one more chance to speak to him, one more chance to tell him that he understood now, one more chance to ask whether any of this had happened before, but the answers were disappearing with the people who might have given them. And as the chain became shorter, Aang turned his attention toward Korra. He could feel her fear, but he could not know whether she could still hear him. He tried to reach her, knowing that she was about to lose something that every Avatar before her had taken for granted. Aang knew that after this, she would blame herself, and she would see the destruction of the past lives as her failure. She would carry 10,000 years of lost history as though she had personally destroyed it. Aang understood that kind of guilt because he had lived with it for the same thing with his very people. Aang desperately reached out to her, but unfortunately, he could not reach her, and that was worse than disappearing. Aang had already died once before, and that death had been peaceful. But now, all of that certainty and all of that peace of the past lives were gone. Aang's own existence began to disappear, and those memories became more important than any great victory or any political achievement, those of his friends, his family, and the construction of Republic City. He remembered Appa's fur beneath his hands, Sokka laughing at his own joke before anyone else understood it, Toph calling him Twinkle Toes, Zuko standing awkwardly at the Western Air Temple asking for forgiveness, Katara standing beside him when he thought he had failed. Those memories were the proof that his life had happened, but now, as the connection collapsed, Aang realized something that was both frightening and comforting. Those people would live on, but he would not be there to see it. They would live great lives, but he would not be there to see it. Unfortunately, from Aang's perspective, the story was ending in darkness. He was not disappearing with the knowledge that everything would work out in Season 4. He was disappearing with doubt, with fear for his family, with fear for the Air Nation, with fear that the Avatar after Korra might never hear his voice, and with the knowledge that Korra was about to face the future without him. So Aang's final thoughts were not calm or wise. There was no great final lesson, no perfect piece of Avatar wisdom. After everything he had endured, Aang was simply afraid. Afraid for Tenzin, afraid for his grandchildren, afraid for Korra, afraid for the Air Nation that he had spent his entire life rebuilding, that it would all disappear. Aang had no clue what was coming next. He could only trust Korra to survive long enough to see it through. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this heartbreaking, really, story from possibly the creators of Avatar, deep on the darkest forums of the Avatar universe back in the day. If you enjoyed this story, let me know down below. I'll cover plenty more from the old forums. In fact, I now own the domain, so I may bring the forums back. Let me know if you want to see that. Thanks so much for watching, guys. If you made it this far, drop a thank Mr. Aang in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next video.